Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today I want to pose a simple question which I suspect is going to be impossible to answer, and that question is, are there too many books? So this was inspired by Michael K. Vaughan, who put up a video during the week asking the question, is it possible for a person to own too many books? I think Michael's answer to that question was yes, in some circumstances it probably is. He did rather cheekily use me, or a picture of me, as an example of somebody who maybe has too many books. I haven't got too many books, I just haven't got enough shelves. But that's a work in progress at the moment. So this mess behind me should start disappearing before too long, hopefully. So various other people, including Steve Donahue and Sean Stanfast, and I'm sure some others too, have done their own response videos to Michael's video. And originally, I was thinking I would do a response video, and then I thought, well, no, because it's either yes or no or maybe. And for the record, I think I fall into the same camp as Michael, and I think yes, it probably is possible for a person to have too many books, just as it's possible for a person to have too many of any object. There can come a point where collecting and purchasing becomes obsessive in an unhealthy way. But anyway, I wanted to pose a different question today, and that question is, as I said at the start, are there too many books? So I'm constantly, not so much with books, but constantly with other forms of entertainment, I find I can feel a bit overwhelmed by the amount of choice that's available. And I think a really good example of this is Netflix. So funnily enough, it's less so now, because I think Netflix production of new content slowed down a lot during the pandemic, and also because there are a lot of other players in the streaming market now, so Netflix is not able to get access to as much content from other producers as it was in the past. Because, for example, any company that produces content which is owned by Disney, that content is now on Disney Plus rather than on Netflix. But certainly there was a period, probably particularly early on in the pandemic, when we were at home more and watching more Netflix, where it felt like there were like 100 new Netflix shows every week, and it was just bewildering, and there was just far too much, and I could never make up my mind what to watch. And consequently, I think at the end didn't watch very much of it at all. So with Netflix, I definitely feel like that. Like there's just so much content that it's too much, and I think it's the same with with other businesses as well, or other forms of entertainment. Like video games. It feels like there's a huge number of different video games, and I am someone who plays video games very infrequently. So when I do, I really have to think about which one I want to play, because I want to make sure I make the most of that time. And it occurs to me with books as well that the same is true. So I did a bit of Googling to try and get a bit of data, and discovered that apparently in the United States there are 275,000 books published each year. So that's not necessarily new books. It can include new editions of previously published books, but that's still a hell of a lot. And in the UK, which clearly is a much smaller country, albeit with a big publishing industry, the number is about 188,000. So between just two countries, the UK and the US, and obviously, they're both big English-speaking countries, and English is a commonly spoken and commonly read language around the world. But nevertheless, between those two countries, nearly 500,000 books are published each year, either new books or new editions of existing books. That's ridiculous. That just seems bonkers. And I'm sure some of those books are, like academic textbooks, or manuals for things, all sorts of, the term book covers a wide range of different things. But nevertheless, 500,000 is a lot. And it made me wonder, do we need 500,000 books published every year? I suspect that we don't. And And I say that as a book lover and as a lover of obscure books as well as really popular books. And the other thing that struck me when I was thinking about this is if you walk into a bookshop, you wouldn't know that there were 500,000 books published, new books published every year, would you? Because certainly, so thinking about my particular passions in terms of reading, horror. Look at the horror section, if there even is a horror section in a bookshop, and probably 50% of it will be Stephen King books. And he only publishes, whilst he does publish a lot, he only publishes like 2 new books a year, doesn't he? Although they do seem very fond of reissuing his material very regularly with new covers. So yeah, there certainly doesn't feel like that huge amount of choice is filtering into physical bookshops. Same with like the fantasy section. The fantasy section of a bookshop will be 50% George R.R. Martin. And the crime section sadly will be 50% James Patterson. Maybe not quite. I think crime there is a bit more variety because it's a very popular genre at the moment. But yeah, nevertheless, it does not feel like there are 500,000 books published yet. So what's happening? So is it that bookshops clearly have a finite amount of space, so I wouldn't expect any physical bookshop to stock 500,000 different titles, let alone the fact that that's only a year's worth. But what I suspect is happening more is that publishers are, whilst they may be publishing lots of different things, they are pushing a much smaller number of books. And publishers, like in any business, publishers are looking for the next big thing, because a lot of those 500,000 books that are published won't make any money. What they're looking for is the next J.K. Rowling or Stephen King or James Patterson or whoever whose books get sold not just in bookstores but in supermarkets and things like that. The kind of books that when you go on holiday, that author's name is on the cover of pretty much everyone's book that you see around the pool. The kind of books that are bought by people who don't read all the time, who aren't avid readers but who enjoy reading, when they're on holiday. So publishers are trying to find the next big thing, and to do that, they throw as much stuff out there as possible to see what sticks. But I think that the marketing firms of publishers do a lot of refining of that to figure out which are the books that deserve the marketing budgets. And clearly, the advent of ebooks means that it's cheaper than ever for publishers and lower risk than ever for publishers to publish a lot of different titles. Because unlike print books, where you have to print the book in order to be able to sell it, I'll get back to that later because that's not entirely true anymore. But in the old days, last century, so we say, publishers would have to print loads of copies of the books to ship them out to bookshops, and if they didn't sell, the publishers would have to take them back and either sell them in remainder bookshops, or literally pulp them. And nowadays, either they can publish books just as ebooks, or they can offer print-on-demand type services where the individual cost of a paper book might be more, but there's no risk because you don't actually produce the book until somebody buys it, and then you very quickly print a copy and chuck it in the post to them. So I think there are so the range of available books has grown massively, but the number of books that actually captures the public imagination, I don't think has grown. I think that's probably stayed the same. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it a good thing for us as avid readers that we can discover, both stuff that's traditionally published with which doesn't get the marketing push, but also self-publishing? And clearly self-publishing makes up a pretty big, I don't know how big a chunk of that 500,000 it makes up, but it will be not insignificant because there are thousands and thousands of authors publishing their own books, either digitally or or print-on-demand versions, or even pre-printed versions. Every day people are publishing new self-published books, and I'm a big fan of self-published fiction, and small press fiction, as I've said a number of times on the channel. So a big part of that, a big part of that 500,000 is self-published stuff, which is fantastic. But nevertheless, do we need that many books? What do we gain by having that many books? And I wonder, particularly with the kind of stuff you do see in bookshops, a lot of it feels very samey to me. So, I talked about publishers going after the next big thing. I think they find, not just an author, but they find a theme, and, domestic suspense novels seems to be definitely a theme at the moment. So they find a theme and they go after that, and they will throw money at any author who can churn out a book that's in that vein, and are much less likely to pick up books by authors who are who are doing something different. So I know two people who have been traditionally published in the last few years. So two people I actually knew before they got published. One of whom writes thrillers, and by thriller I mean, well, in fact they both write thrillers. Okay, so they both write thrillers. One of them writes action adventure type thrillers, and the other one writes domestic suspense style thrillers. Guess which one found it easier to get published? Yeah, it's the domestic suspense one. I think, and they both did manage to get published eventually, which is fantastic. But the person writing the action adventure type stuff had a much harder journey to get to that point. So yeah, there is, there are things that publishers want to publish, and that they will, publish endless, similar books in that genre, because they know that there's a demand for them. So I come back to the question: are there too many books? I don't think I could ever say that there are too many books, because I love books too much, and I love finding random old books that were published 50 years ago that only ever had one print run, and are wonderful and are lost. So I don't think there are too many books, but I do always worry about big businesses' influence over entertainment and our lives. And the example I keep coming back to with are there too many of things is things like toothpaste and washing powder, where there are 50 different options when you go in the supermarket for toothpaste, all of which do basically the same thing, but will have different packaging and different prices and so on and so forth. And it was a few years ago that, and I can't remember which company it was, but one of the big pharmaceutical companies was taken to court because they were selling, and I think it was in Australia they were doing it, they were selling exactly the same pills in different packaging and charging different prices for them. So it was a painkiller, and they were selling like the basic painkiller, just run of the mill, here's a painkiller, pretty cheap. They were doing the same thing but badged up for like back pain or sports injuries for a bit more. They were doing the same thing but for period pain for a bit more, but it was exactly the same drug inside, just different packaging. And I do worry sometimes that that's the case with books as well. How many of those 500,000 books that are published every year really add individual value, and how many of them are just the same old thing again? Time for another random book from the shelves then. And here I have one from a collection of books published by the Imperial War Museum, which are reissues of contemporary books about the Second World War. Which I think is really fascinating. So I bought 3 of them a while ago when I was at one of the Imperial War Museum museums, and I've read one of them, which was I forget what it was called, but it was about the war in Asia during the Second World War. This one is about the Battle of Britain. So this is Squadron Airborne by Elston Trevor from 1955. So all of these books were, written by people who had, real life experience of the Second World War. I've got another one as well, which is kind of a seafaring one. But yeah, I think it's wonderful that these are being reissued, and I do look forward to reading this one, and the other one I haven't read yet. I think the idea of these kind of fiction books but as historical artifacts is fascinating. So as always, hope you enjoyed that bit of Sunday Bollocks. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think there are too many books. I doubt many people will say that there are too many books, but I think it's a legitimate question. So yeah, do let me know what you think in the comments. But yeah, as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.